guys, welcome back to Sola Street and back to another week of learning about God and what His story is in the Bible. And we've been talking about the book of Joshua and what happened after God allowed Israel to go into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. And so we talked about the fact that Joshua led them across the Jordan and on dry land, that he helped them walk around Jericho 7 times following God's instruction, and then God defeated the city of Jericho, and he helped them defeat the city of Ai, and then he helped them defeat the 5 kings. And then the rest of Joshua is full of stories that are kind of hard to read and hard to listen to, because they're all about punishment and the defeat of the sinful people living in the land of Canaan. The thing to remember is that Israel was also a sinful people, okay? But God had chosen a group of people to represent Him to the world and to be His representative, okay? And that was the nation of Israel, and God told them how He wanted them to behave. He gave them leadership to help them know how to behave, and He told them what to do. And so today, instead of telling you a story, I'm going to read the last 2 chapters of the book of Joshua, because they kind of summarize what happened in the book of Joshua. They tell us what's about to happen next, okay? So it's a little bit different today because I'm going to be reading to you, okay? But I want you to pay attention and listen to what Joshua says to the nation of Israel, okay? So this is chapter 23 and chapter 24 of the book of Joshua. And it says, "Now it came about after many days, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all of their enemies on every side, and Joshua was old, advanced in years, that Joshua called for all Israel and said to them, I am old, I am advanced in years, and you have seen all that the Lord your God has done to all of these nations because of you. For the Lord your God is He who has been fighting for you. He's the one who's been doing it. See, I have appointed to you these nations which remain as an inheritance for your tribes, and all the nations which I have cut off from Jordan, even to the great sea towards the setting of the sun." So he's reminding them all of the places that are in the promised land, and all of the people and the nations that they have defeated with God's help, and some places that they haven't defeated yet that they're still supposed to defeat. The Lord your God, He will thrust them out from before you and will drive them from before you, and you will possess their land, just as the Lord your God has promised. He's reminding them that God is a promise keeper, that even though Joshua is old and is probably about to die, that they need to trust God to continue the work that He had started. So here's what He says. "Be very firm then to keep all and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left." Don't mess up. "So that you will not associate with these nations, these which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods." Don't be tricked into being like these people. Remember who your God is. Then he says, "Don't do it or make any one of them, don't let any one of you swear by them, by the other gods, or bow down to them. But you are to cling to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out great and strong nations from before you. And as for you, no man has stood before you to this day." Remember that God has fought with you every single time, and expect Him to do it in the future. "One of your men puts to flight 1,000 men. For the Lord your God is He who fights for you, just as He promised you. So take diligent heed of yourself to love the Lord your God." He's saying, when one of you shows up in a city, 10,000 people run away because they know who your God is. So you need to believe it, and you need to act like He is the God of the people. Be diligent to take care of that reputation of God. Okay. "For if you ever go back and cling to the rest of these nations, if you make friends with these people and their gods, these which remain among you, and if you marry their people so that you become part of them, know this for certain." This is going to happen, okay? "The Lord your God will not continue to fight these nations for you, but they will be a snare and a trap to you." If you don't continue to fight these people and don't continue to be God's punishment, they're going to become you're going to be part of them. And in other words, God is going to have to start punishing you. So this is what he says next. Remember, today I am going the way of the earth. In other words, I'm going to die. And you know all in your hearts and all in your souls that not one word of all of the good words which the Lord your God has said has not been fulfilled. He has not failed in one single word. It shall come about just as all the good words which the Lord your God spoke to you have come upon you, the Lord will bring upon all these threats until he has destroyed you from this good land which the Lord your God has given you. So God has always been a promise keeper. He's done everything he said he's going to do. And he will do this too. If you marry these people and if you become part of them and if you start acting like them, he's going to punish you too. That's part of his promise. So remember that. Okay, and then chapter 24, here's what he says. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes together and all of the elders of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And then Joshua said to the people, this is what God says. From long time ago, your fathers have lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham. Do you remember Abraham? And the father of Nahor. And they served other gods. They didn't serve me. Then I took your father, Abraham, from beyond the river and led him through the land of Canaan. Remember that? Remember when we studied that back in Genesis when Abraham left his father's household and went to the land that God showed him? And then God says, I multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac. Remember Isaac? And to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. We remember those stories, don't we? Those twin brothers with all those fights. And to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it, but to Jacob and his sons I sent them down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron. Remember? That's where we've been in the story. I plagued Egypt by what I did in its midst with those 10 plagues, those 10 terrible plagues. And afterwards, I brought you, Israel, out of Egypt. I brought your fathers, and you came to the sea, and Egypt chased you and pursued your fathers on chariots and with horsemen to the Red Sea. But when they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and he brought the sea upon them and covered them up. Remember that? And your own eyes saw what I did to Egypt. You lived in the wilderness for a long time. Do you remember how long they lived there? 40 years. But then I brought you into the land of the Amorites, who lived beyond the Jordan. And they fought you, but I gave them into your hand. And you took possession of their land when I destroyed them right in front of your eyes. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel, and he tried to get Balaam to curse Israel. But I was not willing to listen to Balaam. So he had to bless you instead of curse you. I delivered you from his hand. Do you remember that story with the donkey? You crossed the Jordan and came to the Jericho, and the citizens of Jericho fought against you, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Gershites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Thus I gave them all into your hand, and then I sent hornets before you, and drove out 2 kings of the Amorites before you. But not by your swords or by your bow, I, God, defeated them. I gave you the land on which you had not labored, farms that you didn't plant, houses you didn't build, cities which you had not built, and you have lived in them, and you have eaten of the vineyards and the olive groves which you did not plant. Now therefore, this is what I want you to do, God says to Israel. Fear the Lord and serve him sincerely and in truth. And put away gods which your fathers served beyond the rivers and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. In other words, commit to God only, right? If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, then choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. You got to make this decision. But as for me, says Joshua, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Okay, so he's reminding Israel everything that had happened to them since God chose Abraham and how God has been a promise keeper. And he's telling them, look, you cannot live on both sides. You have to decide who you work for, who you live for, who you fight for. Decide today who you serve. And so the people answered and said, far be it from us, for we should forsake the Lord and serve other gods. We would never do that. For the Lord our God is he who brought us out from the fathers and us and the fathers out from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage and slavery. And who did these great signs in our sight and preserved us through all of the way in which we went among the people? Who's watched over us all these years? The Lord drove out from before us all these people. We also will serve the Lord. That's what Israel answered Joshua when he asked them this question. But then Joshua said this to the people, you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. Are we holy? Are we perfect? We're going to mess up, aren't we? And that's what Joshua was warning them. So you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. He can't, because he's holy. He can't just be like, oh, I'll ignore it. Okay? If you forget him and you forsake him and serve other gods, then he will turn and do to you what he did to them. You today, Israel, are witnesses against yourself. You said you're going to serve God. Your words are going to prove you to be a liar. But I'm going to tell you this. Put away foreign gods which are in your midst and turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said, we will do it. We will serve the Lord our God. We will obey his voice. And so Joshua made a covenant with the people, and he said, you're going to promise this. He said, he wrote these words in the book of the law of God. And he took a large stone and set it up under an oak tree that was in the sanctuary of the Lord. And he told them, this stone is also going to be a witness. It's going to be a reminder that you said these words. And when you mess up, you're going to see this stone and you're going to remember that you messed up. And you're going to remember what I said was going to happen to you when you messed up. It came about after these things that Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years old. So if you think about it, he was 40 years old when they left Egypt. He was 80 years old when he crossed the Jordan River. And he lived 30 years fighting battles in the land of Canaan, trying to defeat God's enemies. 30 years he served and led the people of Israel. Now it says here, Israel served the Lord all of the days of Joshua and all of the days of the people who survived Joshua, who were in leadership and that knew what the Lord had done for the people of Israel. They buried the bones of Joseph that they brought all the way from Egypt. They buried him in the promised land like they promised that they would. And during Joshua's lifetime, they served God. That's how the book of Joshua ends. And the next book of the history is the book of Judges. And it's going to tell us what kind of job Israel did in keeping their promise to God. Now we know God's a promise keeper, but did Israel keep their promise to follow God and only God, and to listen to God and to trust God and to fight God's enemies? That's what we're going to be learning about next. I know today was a little bit different, but I wanted you to hear that even Joshua was going to remind people of God's promise keeper goodness. Okay, that's why we study the Bible. We study the Bible so that we can remember that God is a good God and that he keeps promises. And that yes, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to mess up, but God also sent Jesus so that he can forgive us. Okay, so when we mess up, we need to ask for forgiveness and we need to start over. Because God will forgive us and God is a promise keeper and he will send his Holy Spirit to help us obey. And we need to think about what we would say when Joshua asks the question, who are you going to serve? Would we say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord? Is that what you would say today? Okay. I want you to think about that. I want you to continue to practice studying your books of the Bible. Try to memorize a verse. I put a verse up there. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's not the entire verse. It's just the end of chapter 24, verse 15, but it's a good one for you to memorize. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful day. Bye.